During the campaign, Donald Trump insisted that he was going to put an end to Washington corruption once and for all, and he repeatedly said, well, you know what he said.
It is time to drain the swamp in Washington, D.C. We are going to drain the swamp. Drain the swamp. We're going to drain the swamp of Washington. We're going to have fun doing it. We're all doing it together.
Well, now that he's been elected, he's having a little bit of a change of heart. So The Hill explains Gingrich, a Trump surrogate, told NPR's Morning Edition that he was told Trump now says the phrase was cute, but he doesn't want to use it anymore. I wonder why. Gingrich, who has been a close advisor to Trump, said he likes Drain the Swamp because it vividly illustrates the problem, because all people in this city who are all alligators are going to hate the swamp being drained. But, he is my leader, and if he decides to drop the swamp and the alligator, I will drop the swamp and the alligator, he says. So Donald Trump claims he's going to drain the swamp, and then he gets in and makes the swamp swampier than ever and fills it with more alligators than it's ever had. I mean, you're appointing the actual CEOs of companies. You have the labor secretary, the literal CEO of Carl's Jr. You have the CEO of ExxonMobil as your Secretary of State. Donald Trump is filling the swamp and deepening the swamp so much that he's just straight up cutting out the middleman. He's not appointing a puppet of the industry to these cabinet positions. He's just straight up putting someone in the industry. Now, the question is, why is Donald Trump having a change of heart? Here's what I think. I think that Donald Trump never actually cared about, quote, draining the swamp. And when he railed against the puppets in the Republican Party like Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, he was right, but we know from earlier reports from Politico that Donald Trump only started to rail against money in politics when he was rejected by big billionaire donors who always contribute to Republican candidates. So, for example, he went to billionaire donors of the Republican Party, and they just straight up rejected him because he's a wild card. They don't really know what he's going to do because he's been on every side of every single political issue in American history. So you never know with Donald Trump, and they want someone who will assure them that they will in fact get their tax breaks. Now, they had nothing to worry about, as we all know now, but I think that Donald Trump saw how he was kind of an outsider. He tried to buy politicians, but ultimately he was never really part of that DC bubble of corruption, and he wanted to be part of it, and he felt excluded. So the reason why he talked about draining the swamp was because he wanted to be part of the swamp, and he wanted to be part of the cool kids club, and he thought that just because he was a billionaire, he could be part of that club, and because he tried to buy politicians, that they would let him into their club. But he was never a part of that club fully, even though I think that he was, but he didn't feel like it. So I think that because of that reason, he always felt the urge to rebel against the DC insiders, and now that he's an insider, he feels accomplished. He feels cool. He's like, well, you know what? I'm part of the swamp. I don't feel excluded anymore, so I'm okay with the swamp. And in fact, I'm going to make it swampier than ever. I mean, the thing about Donald Trump is that he's a narcissist, and what he cares most about is his ego. So if he feels as though anything is hurting his ego, being excluded from that DC corrupt bubble, then I think he's going to speak out against it because he has a big mouth and can't control himself. And now he's part of that DC bubble. He went from an establishment outsider to an insider. And he is as establishment as you could possibly get. I mean, he does skirt party orthodoxy to some extent just because he does things that are very uncharacteristic of former presidents. Like, he always uses Twitter to lambast people and whatnot. And I think that's just part of his personality. But in the end, he's going to govern as any Republican establishment insider would govern. That's very clear right now, but probably worse, because he's given us every indication that the conflict of interest that he has with his business and the people that he's appointing will make DC more corrupt than it's ever been. So he's a faux populist. If you voted for Donald Trump, I'm really sorry, but you were conned. I've said this before, I'll say it again. You were conned. And if Bernie Sanders was elected and he did this, he campaigned as an outsider, but then appointed industry insiders to his cabinet, I'd be the first person screaming about this. But Donald Trump supporters, they don't seem to care. And it's because they can't be objective. They can't admit that they chose a really terrible candidate. And I mean, on the Republican side, who are you going to pick? There wasn't even very good options on the Democrat side. So on the Republican side, certainly, all of them are sellouts to the industry and you don't have many choices, but you took a gamble with Trump and thought, well, maybe he will do what he says. He's not. He's corrupt. And this proves it.
Big league.
Support this podcast by joining the independent progressive media revolution today at humanistreport.com.